Bob Laura, an extremely warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Dan, I'm excited to be here.
Bob, I can't wait to have this conversation. Thank you for joining me at some unknowingly hour that you're now in. You're in the wonderful state of Michigan near Detroit. It's 5 a.m. for you, or 10 past 5. So thank you for. But we had a little conversation beforehand, and you're very much a member of the 5 a.m. club. It's your thing. You get up early. So I'm extremely grateful for you being awake and joining me today. Can't wait.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here too, Dan. I appreciate the work that you do.
You too, Bob. I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. Apart from the annoyance that your team, the Lions, didn't quite make it this year to the Super Bowl, you've been waiting all your life for it as a Detroit resident all your life. So we'll leave that to one side. I'm a Packers fan, Bob, so I can't really talk, right? So
well, that might change things now.
So, Bob, you were very gracious to send me your brilliant book called Retirement Intelligence. And I've been a fan of the work that you've done and doing for ages with the Retirement Coaches Association and all the work you do on planning and communicating what I believe are the most important things about retirement. But your philosophy, your outlook on life has very much been shaped, as many of us has, by your past, by your background and your childhood. I think it's a really relevant place to start, right? For you to share your background, how that shaped your philosophy on retirement, and really what inspired you to challenge this traditional retirement model and focus on retirement intelligence and write the book. There's a lot there, but I'd love you to unpack that.
Yeah, so I grew up in the city of Detroit, in a blue-collar area that was just kind of rough and tumble. And it was a show me, don't tell me kind of a place where if you said you were a fast runner or good at basketball, someone was going to challenge you. They just weren't going to take it on the surface. And that's really emulated in my life as I'm a big fan of practical applications, nuts and bolts. Like, don't tell me what's changing or what's better and different about retirement. Show me, walk me through it, give me something. And so I really think the focus for me in the retirement coaching industry is normalization, context, permission. And so it's actual steps. And again, practical stuff. I think one of the other big things that shaped me was I didn't know what I was going to be when I grow up. So after college, because I went to college to play football, I thought I was going to be a professional athlete. Well, that didn't work out. So I really fell into social work. And I did that for a number of years and really realized that I was going to be broke for the rest of my life if I stayed in there. And so I switched over to financial services. It was at that point where I really understood the need to blend the psychology with the money because I had plenty of clients with plenty of money, but they were miserable. And so the background in social work really just gave me the confidence and the power to ask and keep asking. And just being curious about what makes people tick is really how this really came out. And what I think I've become, I've been doing this for 15 years. So that's a long time. People 15 years ago thought I was crazy doing this. Now it's become more mainstream, but I really am an expert on why people fail at retirement. I've heard all the stories, I've talked to all the people, and that's really what I try to do with the book and the software is develop a process to help people identify those factors and work around them or work through them in the transition.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you say about it. Feels like sometimes you are, 15 years ago, it must have felt like you were swimming against the tide because it still feels like we're swimming against it a bit now, right? In the work that we do. When I say that I'm a financial planner, but I really don't like numbers and I'm not very good at them, it's like everyone looks at me as if I'm stupid, right? And I'm like, well, because it goes well beyond that. It goes, the work that we do is really well beyond that. And you said something actually in the start of the book about, retirement planning is backwards because it focuses too much on the money rather than the individual, right? And I think that's where your whole kind of philosophy around this comes from. I'd really like to kind of explore with you, if we think kind of how we redefine retirement and explore why you believe the traditional retirement, the retirement model or traditional retirement planning is too focused on the money and ignores the most significant kind of parts of this, through the work that we do. We know this is stuff like purpose and identity and relationships. I suppose why is it just an ingrained thing that people have? I'm a financial advisor. I deal with the numbers. Is that kind of where it's got and where it's come from?
Well, of course, a retirement nerd like me, I've studied a lot of stuff. When you look at the history of retirement, especially here in the States, when back in 1984, 85, when 401ks came out and pensions went away, that's when the shift really took place, is that now people are becoming more and more responsible for the financial side. So that was the emergence of the financial industry, is no more pensions and money. And it's just stayed on that path. And of course, in most cases in the past, people would, let's say, retire at 65, but they might pass away at 72 or 74, right? So there wasn't this 30-year runway we had to figure out after they retire. So that's been a significant change in the fact that now people are retiring at 60, 65, but they're living to 90 or 95. So it's changed the game. And I think, too, excuse me, for a while, especially previous generations, they didn't talk about their problems. They're very self-reliant. But now, as people have started, especially the baby boomers, and I'm a Gen Xer, so we're moving towards that retirement age now too, people are talking about it. Couples are realizing, hey, we might not be on the same page. And so there's just been this evolution and this need to really focus on you first. And I think, real quick, Dan, too, statistics kind of say only 50% of people have a financial plan, or only 54% of people work with a financial advisor. Well, it's because retirement planning is complex. But you can take the complexity away if you focus on the person first. When your values are clear, your decisions are easy. And that's really what it's about. It's about reprioritizing you first, then your money, and it makes more sense.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. I mean, why? It's interesting when you kind of talk through that, and you think about how we've got this. You said we've got this backwards. It's a money first equation rather than a life first equation. And there are people like you and I that are trying to kind of shift that conversation, because we know the money first thing ultimately keeps you in the money, which keeps you in that circle, which leads to unhappiness and that constant chase of enough and success that we know isn't that deep work needed to kind of live life of, or live your retirement life as you want it. There's a couple of things actually I want to just touch on in the book. You mentioned, which I think is really a cool way of putting it, this kind of retirement honeymoon phase, where we the disconnect between what we expect of retirement versus what retirement actually is, right? And I see that all the time. It's kind of this wonderful kind of vision of what retirement is, and then the reality sinks in, and it's a really difficult period for people. Why do you believe that retirement is so misunderstood then? Is it, it's kind of like, this is the thing I'm thinking, and I get there and it's not the thing. Why is it so misunderstood?
No, it's kind of funny. It's just been the status quo idea for so long that no one really kind of challenged the sacred cows of what does this look or feel like. And again, it's really because of my social work background, because plenty of clients would come in and they'd be, how's retirement going? Oh, it's the best thing ever. I wish I'd have done it before. But then when I really started asking, like, well, what does that mean? Well, what are you doing every day? What would you tell someone else you really liked or miss about the workplace? And as I just dug in on those next level questions, people really started to be honest that they were floating around, they were bored, they were busy, but it wasn't meaningful. I started to see, of course, I tell people the best way to lose 50% of your portfolio or 60% of your portfolio is not from a stock market crash, but from a divorce. And so what's the point of having $1 million saved for retirement if you're going to lose more than half of it, some to attorneys and the rest to your spouse, if you guys are miserable? Like, it shouldn't just be, let's jam this money. And I think the other big thing for me is, it's almost like retirement's kind of set up like the world's biggest New Year's resolution, right? Right before New Year's, what do? We eat a bunch of food, spend a bunch of money. Everyone goes into the new year, oh, I want to get healthy and save money. It doesn't work like that. And so we procrastinate our best lives, growing closer to our spouses, getting healthier, spending more time with our family, to a point where now we're there and no one else wants it. And so it's just this evolution of applying human science, what we know about science, to the retirement planning process. And it's just taken a long time. And to your point, people still push back on us for trying to help them live the best life.
Yeah. I think it's really, you mentioned divorce, and without going too kind of down a well and being morbid here, well, it's not morbid, is it? Being kind of unhappy. I come across a stat that I had to double check, but in the UK since 1990, divorces in over 60s have gone up from 9% to 40%. And I kind of done some googling around, and I think that it's very similar in the States, right? With this kind of, they call it the grey divorce. There's this massive rise in divorces and relationship breakups in our second half of lives, and I think it's to the point that you made, right? It's kind of actually life has been a bit status quo. We've got up, we've gone to work, we've each had some individual purpose, and we've each had our role in family life, as husband, wife, or partners. And then all of a sudden we're confronted with spending time together, and we haven't really figured out what we both like, what we like individually, what we like together. And actually, I've had it before where you're talking to a couple, and I try and make sure I invite the non-dominant spouse into the conversation first. I don't want them to be led, but by the dominant spouse. And you can kind of see that, one will go, well, I want to do the X, Y, Z, and the other person will turn around and go, well, hold on a minute, like, why? Well, you've never said that before. I don't want that. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. You've been married for 40 years, and this is the first time you're having this conversation about what you want to do. And you can see the trouble that people will be in when it gets there, right? Is that stuff that you kind of...
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on with it. I mean, I think, and then what really ends up happening, again, this is why it's not just talking about this, so whether it's the follow-up work or some other coursework, you have to write the stuff down, because I find a lot of couples, they keep it all up here. Here's my plan mentally for what retirement's going to look and feel like. Well, then you both get there, you haven't written it down or talked about it. That's fertile ground for problems. And so it is about, let's actually write it down. What does an ideal day in a week look like for you? And charting how much time we're going to spend together or apart. What does a perfect year really look and feel like? Because you don't have anything to stand on if you're just making it up as you go, or you're assuming, hey, we lived together for 40 years, we're going to figure this out together. It can unravel really, really quickly. And it's unnecessary if you take the time before. It's just a matter of, if you want to live your best life in retirement, build it before you get there instead of waiting until you get there. And that's really important for couples.
Yeah, could not agree more. I love that. Don't wait till you get there to build it. And you think, there's so much in our lives that we plan for and we pre-build, and yet it seems that probably what is one of the most important time in our lives, and one of the most emotionally challenging, one of the most, it's in the top 5 most destructive periods of our lives, and things that we do, but things that we do within our life, that we don't put any planning really to it. We kind of just blindly sleepwalk into it and think it will all be okay, which I find fascinating. A tip that I try and say to people actually on the couples thing, Bob, is to say that it's okay to be individual. I think a lot of people feel like that they've had these individual lives, and the retirement now is the time they need to come together and then spend all of their time together doing a load of stuff. And I'm like, actually, that even if you really love each other, and that's disastrous. You need 3 journeys, right? You need individual journeys and the one together. You can still be you and have your time. I think it's really dangerous when they try and kind of force this kind of life on one another.
Well, I mean, that what you just said should be cut into a short video so couples can hear it. It's not said enough. The saying here in the States is, I married you for better, for worse, but not for lunch every day. And the problem is, if a guy, and this is very stereotypical in a traditional relationship, his identity is at the workplace. And so when he leaves that workplace, he loses his social connections. And so now he puts it on his spouse to, hey, fill my time, spend my time. And again, wrongfully, because no one's working them through it, they tend to assume that time equals love. And so if you're not spending time with me, you don't love me as much. That's not true. But that's what happens. And then that's where the separation starts to happen, is when she starts doing other things because she wants to. Again, very stereotypical. He feels left out or not part of something. It tends to shut the guy down. And that's why I'm sure you see this all the time. How do I get my husband off the couch? Guys, unfortunately, just aren't as good at retirement as women are, because they tend to have more roles. And so there's a significant amount of work that needs to go into men who strongly identify with their careers, are married, and are making this transition.
I'm going to share a bit of a personal-ish story. My wife is going to kill. My wife does listen to these podcasts, and I didn't really know until she starts quoting stuff back at me. But this happened just last night. My wife's a hairdresser. For people watching on video, I'm her worst client, apart from the beard that needs trimming every now and again. But she come back last night and actually she'd gone to see one of her clients, husband and wife, and he retired August, September time. It was kind of forced on him a bit, apparently, from what she said. It was kind of like didn't really want to retire, but got some sort of redundancy. And she was chatting. This was during the day, so she was chatting and cutting her friend, his wife's hair, and he was asleep on the sofa. This was 1:00, and apparently this is really bad. But he won't be listening to this. Apparently he snored, and it caused his wife to kind of shout at him a little bit and go like, "What are you doing? It's 1:00. Get off the sofa." And my wife's come back and relayed this to me, and apparently, and she then started moaning. Like hairdressers are the gossip queens, right? And gigs, they get everything. She started moaning, going, "Look, like he doesn't do anything. He's got forced retire. He hasn't really thought about what he's going to do. He literally, he's asleep for 2 or 3 hours every day. He's in his early 60s. He's not fit or he's just nothing. And it's really causing a strain on them." And like Diane, my wife, was like, do you want to have a conversation with them about this stuff? And I'm like, well, I don't know whether we should mix hairdressing and retirement, right? But I'm sure we can do this. But it's really, she come back and I'm then having a conversation with her about this exact thing, right? It's kind of like, well, if you don't know what you're going to do, I think we'll just be inherently lazy. Men will be horrendous at this, as you said, right? And I think it's really interesting you mentioned that. I want to stay on this subject a little bit with you, Bob, if that's all right, because I think kind of the emotional and social aspects of retirement are as overlooked as any topic in this. And on the flip side, there is probably as much research on this topic to show how loneliness affects depression, right? And the depression rates in the retirees are going up quite a lot. You put in the book, 84% of retirees report a drop in social interactions once retired, with 40% experiencing a drop of like half or more, right? So, so it's not just 84%. You've got nearly half of people are saying that they're doing half as less. That doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. So, because I've done a lot of thinking about kind of isolation and loneliness, and there's a lot of research out there that says this could be the next thing that comes along. This could be the next real big health challenge when it comes to the effect that loneliness has on us. And we know all those studies out there. The Harvard study that talks about positive relationships as being the key to a long and happy life. So let's address those quite alarming statistics around social connections and loneliness and depression and anxiety. And I know you talk about substance abuse as well in there as well, right? It's kind of really, alcohol, etc. Talk to me about that.
What's interesting about what I call the dark side of retirement, I started writing about this in 2010. And again, people came out and just said, you can't say that, man. You cannot be talking about this. And a lot of times if I work with a corporation or a group and I'm writing some content for them, it's the first thing they want to screen out. But I will tell you, it is always the thing someone comes up to me after a conversation to talk about. If I do a presentation or I'm doing a workshop, someone's going to come up and say, "Oh my gosh, the dark side. That happened to my dad. That was my mom. That happened to my sibling." And so it's this normalization that retirement is a challenging time. And if you don't have things in place to help you replace the way you get your psychological needs met in the workplace, the easiest thing to do is addiction, whether it's prescription pills, a chemical, alcoholism, or other drug abuse. It's the lowest barrier to feel happy. I've actually talked to a group that runs a 55 plus community. They won't answer the phone after 1:00 because everyone's calling drunk. And so it's a significant thing. And then I think the other thing that really happens, you talked about this lately with the honeymoon phase. Well, the honeymoon phase is really the time to establish new habits and routine. If you don't, you're still establishing new habits and routine. So to the point with your friend, if his new routine is to sit on the couch, open up the refrigerator every 10 minutes and take a 3-hour nap every day, that's not going to change 3 or 6 months. You're building that habit. And I think that's what happens to people is they move into retirement. They get what we call maladaptive or bad habits. They can't get out of it. And then they start complaining or they get old and cranky, very, very fast. Because I'm sure you've seen this too, where some clients, when they retire, boom, it seems like they lose 10 years, as far as they look younger, that they feel better. Other people do the opposite. They age 10 years really, really quickly. And so it's really important that first 30, 60, 90 days that there's goals to stay connected. There's goals to, create this new routine, not just hope it's going to work or you're going to get there, because it makes it twice as hard.
Yeah, and it comes back to your point about that like you said, the pre-planning bit, right? It's kind of like if you're going to go into this, and I'm a big fan of a bit of a wind down period, right? I think if you've worked very hard, and you might need to have some relaxation, right? This is not, you don't have to kind of go out of the fire into the frying pan type thing, right? You need some, but also you just need a sense of what you're going to do, right? You can't go into this blind and think, oh, do you know what, I'll leave it for, I think there's a bit of research that says if you leave this longer than like 7-8 months, it starts becoming a habit, and then you really struggle to get out of this. So a big tip for people, have 6 months off if you've been stressed and you need to kind of have some downtime, but during those 6 months work on yourself, but don't leave it much longer than 6 months to start actually getting back out there. Otherwise you'll end up that, what you're doing will become habitual.
I mean, you lose your work friends because you haven't stayed in touch with them. You don't have new relations. So you're exactly right. It's just this process. And I think the real reality for people, whether you choose to retire or you're forced to retire, technically, if you're really good at your job and you really like it, you're really going to stink at retirement. And it's just, because even when we do our RQ assessment, people who say their work is important, that they find value, it creates mental stimulus, they have social connection, like right there, red lights going off that this is going to be a problem because there's a lot more to replace. That's also why I say financial advisors are actually some of the worst people with retirement. Excuse me, just because we're so enmeshed in our work, our clients are our friends, and they appreciate what we say, and they hang on to our words, and they want our advice, and that's a lot to give up because your wife and kids don't want to hear it from you.
Yeah. I'm reading a brilliant book, and I really read it, From Strength to Strength by
Oh,
Arthur
yeah.
Brooks, right? And actually he talks about something which I'm really thinking hard about now, workism, right? Or you've got alcoholism, but you've got this thing where actually if you are successful and you are revered in some sort of way, you can become a workaholic. And being a workaholic is as addictive as being an alcoholic, and it can really be a problem for people because you are addicted to success and achievement. And he talks about jumping off kind of one curve to another in terms of our ability to achieve gets less and less and less, probably from our 40s, and people hang on to being a workaholic, but they're not very good at their job anymore compared to people that are. And so what you find, as you said, what you find is people that are so connected within their workplace end up being workaholics and stay working too long and all that stuff because they don't have anything else that they can do. And it's a bit like you need that high and that high again and keep going. And they're the most, and deep down, those people do want to step away as well. It's like an alcoholic, right? I mean, I'm not trying to downplay this stuff, right? These are really big problems for people. People that are addicted to something know they shouldn't be addicted to it, and they don't really want to be addicted to it anymore, but they're addicted to it for the reasons that they can't let go of it. And it's the same with work. And I think that's where we get these real alarming statistics around these mental health challenges, because if you're addicted to work, but you're not as good as what you once were, you're going to be anxious about that. You're going to start getting depressed around that. And then you leave that place without doing any planning or thinking. And it's like, oh my God, we've got a double whammy here of problems.
I mean, that's the simultaneous levels of change. Like, change by itself isn't bad, but when you get hit with 2 or 3 things, that's when it really starts to hurt. And, I use the term enmeshment. So if you're very enmeshed in your work, you're getting all your psychological needs met there. That's why we use positive psychology to really kind of talk about, hey, if you're getting positive emotion or engagement, meaning, or accomplishment in your workplace, let's talk about how you're going to find that outside of it. Because when you realize how big that void is of what you get at work, especially if you're good at your job, and what you're going to miss, you realize how hard it is to replace it. Golfing, grandkids are not, and crossword puzzles are not going to replace it. And so you really have to work on, like, I like fishing, but I don't do a lot of it. I just need to start doing it more so that when I am ultimately retired, I've got a routine or a process or times of the year I go do it. And so it's one of those things that the better you are at the work, the sooner you got to start working about your identity outside of the workplace instead of in it.
Yeah, I love that. Again, another bit. I love playing golf, and I could play golf loads, but I couldn't make golf my work. So, and I think a lot of people try, they go, actually, this is my hobby. If your hobby becomes your full-time thing, you're on the road to disappointment. It's okay. I look, it's okay going fishing once a month, and then every third month having a really bad day in the fish, and you don't catch anything. Can you imagine having like 4 bad fishing days if you fish 7 days? You'd be a wreck, right? And I think about that when it comes to golf. It's like I love my golf, but I get so annoyed at myself if I don't play well. And if I'd done that 5 days a week and I played rubbish 3 of them, I'd be a wreck. And I think that's what
Your shoulders
you know.
would start hurting and everything.
Yeah.
And so it's, yeah. But I think that is the glossy brochure that we're all
Mm,
sold. That when you retire, you step through this magical door, the heavens open up, and you get to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But at the end of the day, you don't know, and you've seen this as a planner too. Some people don't make it to retirement. Some people make it 30 years. Some people make it a year.
yeah.
And you can't just hope that it's magically going to unfold and you'll have all the time to do whatever you want, because you don't.
Yeah, yeah. Just a quick thing on that as well. There's an exercise that I do with people that I really really love, and I get them to think about their kind of emotional and financial aspects of work and what they're going to miss. So there's kind of 2 columns. You've got kind of emotional and financial, and there's 10 things in each column. And I get them to go out, give each one of these a score of 1 to 5 in how important this is, and then add them up. And I haven't had anybody that's come that the economic stroke financial things of work is more than the non-financial. And everyone's really confused. They kind of go, hold on a minute. So I get all of this stuff from work. And so this is all the important stuff. And some people, the scores are ridiculous. Like there's like they hardly get any monetary reward from,
Yeah.
it's just a thing. And I think the sooner that people kind of realize that, kind of all that, as you said, all those non-financial elements that you get from work, the easier the transit, or the easier potentially, it's not, the transition is, and the easier to think about the emotional and social aspects, because you can figure out those things before you get there, as we've been
Well, I
talking
think to
about.
your point real quick, I think that's a great exercise that people need to do. And I think, what I've seen is that, like in the 90s or 60s, there was this idea that if you were wealthy, you could live a life of leisure, and that was the way to go. And that was kind of the start of the haves and the have-nots, right? Well, the new haves and the have-nots, the new haves are the people not with all the money. They're with the work-life balance, with strong connections with their family, with routine, with health. And so there's this shift that's taking place, but people don't realize it, that they still think, I need to be wealthy and live a life of leisure, when you don't. You really don't need to be wealthy and just focus on money. You need to be happy, healthy, and connected. And if you're there, you're going to be much richer than the other side of the equation.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I want to I want to get your brief view on this, because there's so much I want to talk to you about, particularly about your retirement quotient framework that you've got. But whilst I talk about purpose and identity a lot, and I've had people on talking about this, so I'm not going to necessarily labor the point, but I really want to get your views on it, because I think you've got some slightly different things that are worth sharing. I love one of the quotes you make. You say retirement doesn't change people or make them better or different. It makes them more of who they already are. It's you times 2. And I kind of, I really love that. It's kind of going, well, actually, this is not about changing. This is going, actually, who are you? And and actually, probably you've suppressed a really good version of you and the version that you want for many years. So figure that out and double down on it. But we all know, right? Many retirees or people that are thinking about retirement or going into retirement struggle with that transition, because we talked about that work identity transition, and they struggle with redefining their purpose. How, and you talk about Maslow's hierarchy, which is pretty famous, but you've kind of adapted that to apply it to how retirees need to rebuild their belonging and self-esteem. Just talk me through that. How can we start to think about that, and how can people start to think about redefining their identity?
I think if you look at Maslow's, and again, you can look this up on Google, but really there's these 5 tiers, right? You kind of got your basic needs and your safety needs, but then you start to move into community and then your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, which a lot of times comes from the workplace. And as you move towards life, as you turn 50 and 60 and 70, you get to that level 5, which is supposed to be self-actualization, where you become the best version of yourself. The problem with retirement is when you leave the workplace, you rip out some of your self-esteem related to the external world, and you rip out a big part of your community. So now you go into retirement thinking, I'm finally ready for me time and I'm going to create the best version of myself. I've been waiting for this for 30 years. And now you don't have a couple of the key building blocks. And so this is where I think the context is important, because I think you see this too. People get to retirement and they'll say, I feel out of sorts. It doesn't feel like I thought it was going to. Well, that's because you got these two other layers ripped out. You didn't have a way to replace them. And so I do think it's really about getting yourself off of autopilot, because that's what happens to people. They're just going, going, going. They get to retirement and all of a sudden they're like, I guess I need to do some different things. And people have default behaviors. They do what they do. Here in the States, there's some interesting statistics about lottery winners. Most lottery winners are broke within the first 7 years. If you're bad at money, more money's not going to help you. If you're bad at managing your time or your health or your habits or your relationships, retirement's not going to help. There's more time and fewer distractions. And so I think it's just about coming to the realization of, like, retirement doesn't eliminate work. You have to do more work. It just reorients it. And so you've got to work on yourself. And that's not easy. And more importantly, Dan, this is why I think working with a professional like yourself or a retirement coach, they need a process, right? So, hey, there you go, Dan, there's all your problems. Good luck. Go solve them. And that's what I think happens with most advisors. Like, you're not going to transition. Well, this doesn't look good, but good luck. And
Yeah,
so there
yeah,
needs
yeah.
to be some framework and some, like, just exercises. Like, you have those 10 things, like, that's brilliant. Here's some things to help you understand this, but to put a concrete plan in place instead of hoping it just works out.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really, I can imagine some of these conversations, right? And I'm not trying to downplay, but we know that true retirement coaches and true retirement planning is not as widespread as what people think it is, right? It's still very much focused. And I can imagine and actually I do know this firsthand from working with people that have worked with other financial advisors that have focused on the money. And it's this kind of like, well, I know you're going to struggle. You're not really going to transition very well, but you've got more than enough money, so just get on with it. Like, you're in a really fortunate position. You've got loads of money. I've done all the calculations. I've shown you the fancy spreadsheet. You're never going to run out of money. So you're not going to spend. Go spend more, buy more stuff, spend more stuff. What are you doing? And like, no, it just doesn't get to the root of the. So that they come, and I've worked with people like they've come to me and gone, I've had all these wonderful charts, and I know that I'm never going to run out of money. Yet I feel like actually worse than I did before I retired. This is ridiculous, and it's really interesting that you say that. Right, we talked about frameworks, we've talked about exercises. You have got an unbelievable framework that you've created, the Retirement Quotient framework, or as you've called it, RQ. So I'd love to discuss the motivation behind creating RQ, the framework, how it flips traditional retirement on its head by obviously prioritizing individuals over money, and break down those components, because there are 4 components of this. And so let's break those down and talk about them a bit. And because I think that it's such a great framework too. And you've got a particular assessment or test that people can take to find out their RQ.
Yeah, so there wasn't, it's interesting because in financial services, everything they want to quantify it, right? So give me a number that says I'm passing or failing, that's what they do with the dollars and cents. Well, it's hard to quantify personal retirement readiness. And so that was really the impetus to really figure out a way to do that, to create a mechanism that said, how prepared are you? And what's really important about this is, again, it's really about common sense stuff. Why do most people fail at retirement? Is because they don't take a look at who they are and what's important to them. For example, and this is part of our assessment, if you tell me you're a type A personality and you tell me that you have no goals for the first 30 days or that your plan for retirement is to go with the flow, there's a problem. because that's not going to happen. You're not going to all of a sudden be this super chill, easygoing person that doesn't want to accomplish something. You're going to feel out of sorts in 30 days. Or we also know if people say they want to volunteer or are waiting to get to retirement to develop an exercise routine, they're going to fail because there's no process for doing it. And so what we're really trying to do is wake people up to who they are and what's really important, and map over what we know are common reasons why people fail to this assessment. Again, one of the key questions being, how do you plan to introduce yourself in retirement? Most people have not thought about it, so they write down retired. Well, in the real world, unfortunately, this is a stigma. This is a problem that when people say they're retired, they initially think that they've accomplished something like, yes, I've made it to retirement. Look at me now. But everyone else thinks you're irrelevant and you don't know what's going on. So the conversation stops. So if we know those things happen, if we know type A people need goals, why are we not putting this together and helping them kind of wake up to it and then putting a plan in place? And so it really is this process of understanding why people fail, helping them self-identify with their personality and their traits, and then making sure they have a plan that works for them instead of this generic, because you mentioned like the Harvard longitudinal study. So great, you need social connections to be successful. What does that mean for an extrovert versus an introvert? An introvert needs 3 or 4 friends and a close relationship with their spouse. An extrovert needs 50 friends and a lot of acquaintances to keep busy. Two very different plans. And so the broad-based research needs to go by the wayside. We need to drill down for the person. And that's what we tried to do.
I love it. I think it's really, and I just think the headings that, you get your RQ by looking at intelligence, emotion, spiritual, or spirit, I can't even say the word, spirituality, and adversity, which I think, actually when you break that down and think about those 4 things. And I think, when people talk about spiritual, I mean, this isn't, you don't have to be religious, right? I mean, I think that's, this is, so the definition of that, but I think it's really important to think about those 4 areas in more detail to come. And as you said, everyone is so individual and you can't read a book I mean, books are great, right? Obviously, you've wrote a great book, but you can't necessarily read a book and apply everything to you because, as you said, you might need 50 friends, not 4 friends. So we all know we need that, but everybody needs something slightly different to be able to kind of feel like they are, making a meaningful difference of that part of their lives that they know they need to work on.
Yeah, I think that, and again, the equation that we kind of use is this. You need IQ. You need to just be informed that retirement is a major transition. There's a dark side that you're going to do better if you have a plan. Emotional. So how are you going to manage all these emotions, these thoughts and feelings? Because people don't think about it. And again, just even thinking through, how am I going to replace what I get at the workplace? What's going to give me positive emotion? What's going to make me feel connected and engaged? I think the spiritual quotient, again, is core values and beliefs. So are you living a life based on what's important to you? I don't want to say people aren't, but in general, they're on autopilot. They're doing what they need to do. They're surviving. They're not thriving. And so if you don't take the time to really say, what is the most important thing? If it is family, if it is health, let's make sure you're doing stuff about it. And then I think the adversity quotient, resiliency is so, so important. You're going to get knocked down. Our bodies are aging. We're losing friends as we get older. A lot comes at us. And so do you have the support? Do you have the thought process, the mindset? Are you a lifelong learner? And so we can apply these things. We can ask these questions, and then it comes back and we can say, hey, here's some really basic things that you can do to start to improve yourself for this transition.
Yeah, one of the things that I do talk about a lot to people, particularly if we kind of go back to the work thing, and it's not just about work, but for so many years, I think we've been kind of spoon-fed purpose and identity. Whether we like it or not, we've been given it, and we go to it. It's there, and we need to kind of realize that isn't necessarily reality at this stage of life, right? There is no more spoon feeding here. This is stuff we've got to figure out ourselves. We don't need to figure out our purpose because our purpose is laid on a plate for us. When it's not laid on a plate, we need to figure it out. And actually, at no point in our lives have we really had to figure our purpose out Because I'd done a little LinkedIn video thing the other day. When we think about our childhood, we had freedom, but we didn't have any wisdom, right? We had nothing to kind of go on. And so you had this freedom, what I call freedom without wisdom. We're constrained but learning in our kind of in our working years, and constrained in a way that we are spoon fed our purpose and our identity, and we're given it, and and we get promotions, which creates another identity for us, and all this stuff. And then we get to this point where we've now got freedom again, and we've got loads of wisdom. So we could have made choices down here, but we couldn't do it. Now we're up here, we can do it, but we kind of have no skills, right? Because we've gone, actually, for all of our life, I haven't had to do this thing. And it's really interesting. You said about getting people to say who they are. And I see it all the time. When I meet people and ask who they are, they don't say that. I go, what do you do? Or, it's a typical question, isn't it? Kind of, what do you do? If they're retired, they answer it. A lot of people answer, I used to be, right? And I'm like, oh, hold on a minute. I mean, you haven't gotten over that bit yet. How long ago was that? And I've had some people say, I used to be that. And that was 15 years ago. And you're thinking, so how you've still connected your identity to something you stopped doing 15 years ago. There's some issues involved there, right? I think it's really.
I mean, I love the visual of kind of spoon feeding people purpose. Like it's just like it's kind of, and so I think that is just a great example of how we kind of move along this process. Then what I tell people is really, really important is retirement isn't a feeling. People think they're going to feel a certain way when they get there, but feelings are confusing. Your activity is and your behaviors are what dictate how you feel. So if you're doing nothing, you're going to feel lousy. And so that's really what happens is they think, now that I'm retired, I'm going to feel happy and excited every day. You're not. If you're not doing stuff that makes you feel that way or that will foster those feelings. And so it is about activity. It is about behavior and habits. It's not about feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings me nicely on actually to your top 10 lessons on retirement, which I absolutely love. Now, I'm going to say all top 10, and I want everybody to go and buy the book, to go and read, not just everything that Bob's written, but these top 10 are amazing. And I want us to focus on maybe 2. If we can get to 3, that'd be wonderful in the next few minutes. But your top 10 lessons on retirement. Retirement is empty, number 1. Number 2, beware of the dark side. You've already mentioned some of these, actually. Beware of the dark side. Number 3, the wrong top 10 list. Number 4, retirement isn't a feeling, as you've just said. Number 5, up and coming subtractions. Number 6, retirement doesn't eliminate work. Number 7, the lost and found table. Number 8, life on the back burner. Number 9, stop saying retire to something, which that's one we're going to go to. And number 10, the only guarantee. In order to read about all of those, go and buy Bob's book, and the links will be in the show notes. But I want to dive into. We'll try and get 3. Can we dive into retirement is empty a little bit? Now, we may have kind of touched on this a bit, but just give me your kind of overarching thoughts on that lesson.
It's a made-up manufacture of life. There's nothing there. So it's an empty bucket, so you're basically stepping into an empty bucket. There's nothing there. And so it's up to you to fill it with things that are going to make you feel happy and connected. And so assuming that the process of retirement itself, the act of retirement, is going to give you something, it doesn't. It's up to you to do those things. And here's the trick. If you don't fill it up with stuff that's important to you, other things will fill the bucket. That's where the dark side and other things sneak in. And so it's important to realize you have a massive void you're walking into, and you have to fill it up right away.
Yeah, just quickly on that. I in my exercise book, that retirement workbook that I do with people, I've got kind of a stop doing list with them, and a yes and no type scenario. So I think it's as important to say no to stuff as it is to say yes to stuff, because if you fill your bucket up with the wrong things, it can cause a lot of issues, right? And I think the problem is people understand that you've got an empty bucket, and you'll have people come out the woodwork, and very close family will go, actually, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do that? And I see it all the time. It's like, actually, I wanted to do this in retirement, and now I've become a full-time grandparent because I've literally said yes to everything that's come my way to fill the diary. And now I actually hate this. This is not what I wanted to, what I wanted to do.
Well, the thing I say, a lot of retirees are busy they're not doing anything meaningful. And so they get consumed by busy tasks that just wear on them over time that makes things worse. So you're spot on with that.
Yeah. And reading this bit was a challenge to me because you've definitely challenged me and made me rethink how I communicate this bit. And this is point number 9. So stop saying retire to something. Because I've said for quite a while, I think you need to figure out what you're going to retire to, not from. Everyone's focused on I need to retire from work, from work, from work. Focus on what you're going to retire to. Now, I don't think you disagree with me like 100%. But I love what you've talked about in terms of saying, stop saying retired to something. There's another thing to think about.
It's cliche. It doesn't mean anything. In framework, overall, it's a good rule of thumb to be thinking about, well, what am I going to do in retirement? But again, it's procrastinating. Why are you putting off the most important things to you? And I hear this all the time. Bob, when I get to retirement, I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to spend more time with family. I'm going to do this. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to do any of it because you don't do it right now. First, we make our habits, then our habits make us. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, right? And so it's really about retire with it. So that doesn't mean you're working out every day or you don't have to be extreme, but you've got to have these underlying habits in place so that you're just finding ways to continue to do them or to do more instead of start fresh, because it never works out. Retirement doesn't change you. It's just going to make you more of who you are. And so start building that best version of you now. Don't wait until you're retired.
And just to kind of reiterate the point you made, your last sentence in that particular bit about stop saying retire to something is, please stop saying that people need to retire to something and replace it with the more relevant and insightful suggestion, as you just said, to retire with something. I love that framework. You can't, build your profile now and retire with it. That's going to be amazing. I really, really love it. A good friend of mine, Carl Richards, who does and he's been on the podcast. He's got one of my favorite sayings. It's sometimes people need an empathetic hug, and some people sometimes need the punch in the face, metaphorically. Now I think we've done some empathetic hugging, but this is now the punch in the face from Bob, because number 10 is the only guarantee. So here's Bob's punch in the face. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, the only guarantee that comes with retirement is you're going to die. And, it's the, when people hear that, they're like, let's move on to something else. And I think the opportunity there is, again, to dissect down of like people, the biggest fallacy about retirement is that you now, once you retire, have 20 to 30 years to do whatever you want, whenever you want. And that's just not true. And the sooner you wake up to that, you can kind of flip that question and say, okay, if I don't have all the time, what do I need to do with my time? If I don't know if I'm going to be here 5 or 10 years, because again, I'm sure you see this, but here in the States, it's like, oh, I just retired. At some point, I'd like to take all the grandkids to Disneyland or Disney World, or I'd like to, go on a European riverboat tour, but everything is 5 or 10 years out. And so the flip is kind of, what happens if you don't have that time? And what happens if you live 1 week, 1 year, or something happens with your spouse? There's so many what ifs that get rid of them. Take the highest priority things, the things that are most important. You start getting them checked off now. Don't wait 3, 5, or 10 years.
Yeah. And that comes back to this kind of no regrets retirement plan, right? That's kind of, it's I think I talk and without trying to make this kind of funny, but I do talk about, I'm in the kind of regret minimalization business, right? That's kind of how I see it. I think, and you talk about the top 5 regrets of the dying, and there's, Bronnie Ware's great book, and I've interviewed Jordan Grummett on here, who's about purpose, and he was a hospice doctor, and he talked about those kind of things as well. What were people at the end of their life saying? And what they regretted was not doing. It wasn't whether it was successful or failure. It wasn't whether they achieved. It was just actually not doing, not taking action. And I love the fact that we want to get into a point where we are creating a no regrets retirement plan.
Well, and I think too, like, I've never been called as a financial advisor to the bedside of someone who's dying. No one ever says, oh my gosh, I've only got 24 hours left. Call my financial advisor. I want to update on my portfolio. It doesn't happen. They call their family and their friends. And so I think it's just the reality of, how are we helping people get to that point where they can have no regrets? And I think Dan Pink has a great book about regrets too. Regrets technically signify your values. And so when you take the time to say, hey, what would I regret if I didn't do this in 1, 3, or 5 years, you can turn those into goals. And when you look at what's on that list of things that you would regret, it's going to show you what you value and what's important. And so it's an expeditious way to kind of kill two birds with one stone, not to be morbid about the whole death and the thing that we're talking about with the guarantee, but this idea that you can identify your values as well as goals by signifying what your regrets would be over certain periods of time.
Yeah, love that. Bob, we could talk for so long on this. So as we start to kind of wrap this up over the next few minutes, I'm very conscious of your time, and you probably need another coffee because it's now, what is it, 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. in the morning.
Yes.
I need another coffee, and it's only 11 a.m. for me. So I just want to see if we can just tap into a bit of your wisdom and give the listeners just some things to take away, some things to really think about. You've talked about habits and mindset a lot, which I love. Is there anything that you can kind of give them as a takeaway listening to a podcast around, what personal habits or mindsets should they be working on before retiring? And I know the answer is all of them, but is there some quickish wins, some things to get the ball rolling that they could really start to think about?
So I think three of my favorite questions I ask people about retirement and them thinking about their transition is, whose rules are you following? Why are you following them? And what would happen if you changed them? Because I think we all move towards retirement with these general ideas and these rules of thumb, or what people would call rules of dumb, right? There's this generic idea. What does retirement mean to me? What is it going to look like? Well, whose rules are you following to get there? Because you're probably going to end up on the wrong street in the wrong place by following someone else's. So stop doing that. If you can identify whose rules you're following, then you can identify what would happen if you changed them. What if I started thinking differently about this? What if I stopped caring about money and said, you know what, I'm not going to kill myself for the next 10 years so I can retire at 62, and then you could start to semi-retire. You could work for 20 years, and then really identifying steps to take to change your mind. And so for me, it's using those questions to get people off autopilot, because you're just going. And so whose rules are you following? Why are you following them? And most of the time it's just because you haven't stopped to think about it. And then what would happen if you changed directions or broke those rules? I think it'd be very free. It'd open up kind of this new level of thoughts and ideas. And so I think that's a powerful way to shift your mindset and what you're being told about the process.
Fantastic. I've said before on this, there's a 30-second rewind button on a lot of podcast players. So hit that now. Go back to listen to what Bob said. There, great advice and guidance. And there's one quote I want to finish on, and then I'll ask you one final question. In my notes to you, I've put it as kind of inspiration, right? I think it's a really inspirational quote, and I love it, and I might steal it. Obviously, I'll get your permission, written permission. But retirement doesn't have to look or feel like a half-baked jailbreak. It can be one of life's greatest adventures where you get to decide and direct what you want it to be like. I mean, we probably could have had a podcast just talking about that sentence, right? I mean, tell me how you think, just very briefly, kind of the thought around that particular.
Yeah, several years ago, I was watching a documentary about prison escapes, and they talked about 60% of people are caught within the first 24 hours, or I forget what the number is, and 85% are caught in the first week. And you're like, well, what does it have to do with retirement? But for most people, what I see happening is when you focus on breaking out of jail, you focus on getting out and beyond the walls. And you don't really have a plan, support, or resources when you're out there. And I think when people approach retirement, they think of it like a jailbreak. I just got to get out of the workplace. And once I get out, I'll figure it out. You're going to look like a person walking down the street, hitchhiking in an orange jumpsuit. You're going to stand out and it's going to look bad. And so instead of, and I think this is for our industry, Dan, instead of letting a financial professional set you up just to financially get you beyond these walls, what are the tools, the resources? How are you going to survive and make it out there on the run? Because if you don't have that in place, you're going to end up back in jail or back in the workplace.
Analogies just come to my head, right? Is the financial advice planning industry giving people the shovel to dig the hole to get out of jail? They're not giving them what to actually bloody do when they get out of jail to stop get caught back in, right?
And that, what's really going to happen, in my opinion, in the industry, people are going to start asking, does your advisor talk about more than money? Because that's the commodity, right? And so pretty soon AI can do it, robots can do it. And so it's really about humanizing it. And again, I think it's a great framework to, hey, you don't want this jailbreak concept. You want to be walking out free, and you want to be exonerated, and you want to relive and rebuild. And so that's a very different process that advisors can facilitate instead of the half-baked jailbreak.
Bob, What a wonderful place to leave this conversation. I think there is another episode in us at some point to talk about some of this in more detail, but I've gathered so much insight into your work, and this conversation's proven really good for me. If no one listens to it, I'm a better person and planner for it. But I know there'll be some people listening. So thank you so much for your time, your wisdom. Thank you for writing the book. The links to the book and all of your work will be on the show notes, Bob, and people can just connect up with you if they want to figure out more stuff on LinkedIn. And
it's easy to find me on LinkedIn, my email. There's websites out there. Just search me and you'll track me down pretty quick.
Bob, thank you for getting up, but you normally get up at this time anyway, which you've told me so. But thank you for kind of giving me your morning this morning, and for all of your wisdom on the podcast. Such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the work that you're doing, because this is what really needs to happen: is more and more people talking about it, getting mainstream. So thank you for you do, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that too. And it just leaves me to thank everybody once again for listening in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care.